Welcome to Game Fondue Reviews. In this video, we're going to take a look at Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall is an area control game in which players are vying to be the mayor of New York. Let's jump right in with a description of the rules, see a few example turns being played, then I'll be back for some closing remarks. This is Tammany Hall, set up for a 3-player game. To set up, each player is going to pick a color, take all the word bosses in that color, and put one of them on the 0 space of the scoring track up here. And then each player is going to take 3 slandered chips, which are these, and you're going to take the year marker and put it on the 1 space of the year track. Next, you're going to stock the setup boxes as indicated in this table here. We can see the setup boxes for Zone 1 include a green, another green, 2 whites, and 2 oranges. And then in all player counts, 3, 4, or 5 players, you're going to stock Zone 1 immediately. Tammany Hall always gets a green, which you can see here, but then the rest from this box are randomized to the other locations in Zone 1. We can see Zone 1 goes here, Zone 2 is up here, and Zone 3 is over here. If you're playing a 4 or 5 player game, you're also going to randomly stock Zone 2 from here at this time with 1 cube in each. And if you're playing a 5 player game, you're also going to stock Zone 3. But in a 3-player game or a 4-player game, you're not going to start with all the zones stocked, and we'll show how they stock throughout the game later in the video. Aside from that, all remaining immigrant cubes go in the bag, and you're just going to put the political favor chips out where everybody can access them. At this point, you're ready to start the game. The game is played over 16 turns, represented by this track here, divided into 4 terms of 4 years each. After every 4th year, there's an election phase that takes place, but each turn is made up of 3 phases, which include the Castle Garden phase, the player turns, and then the end of year phase. After 16 turns, there's a final scoring, which we'll get into later in the video, and at that point, whoever has the most victory points, which are recorded on this track here, is going to be the winner. So in a turn, or year of the game, as it's known in the game, players are going to take turns in clockwise order, beginning with the first player, by completing both the Castle Garden and player turns phases. After everybody's completed the Castle Garden and player turns phases, then we're going to complete the end of year phase altogether. During a player's Castle Garden phase, they're going to fill the Castle Garden with 2 more cubes in players if it's empty. So of course the first turn of the game, it's empty, so we're going to put in 5 because we're 3 players, so 2 more than that is 5. So you would just drop those cubes here from the bag at random, and those would be the cubes that are going to be available to the players later this turn. So after restocking the Castle Garden if it's empty, or not restocking it if there's already some cubes in it, the active player is going to move on to their individual player turn. During a player's turn, there's 3 possible things they can do, and they can do them in any order. But one of those 3 steps is mandatory, and that's placing pieces on the board. A player has to place either 2 ward bosses or a ward boss and an immigrant cube from the Castle Garden on the board. When placing immigrant cubes or ward bosses, players can place them in any active region of the board. A region's active if it already has a cube in it, so anywhere in Zone 1 right now would be active. In a bigger game, these would already start active, but they're going to become active later in the game. So you could take a ward boss, you could place it anywhere. If you're placing 2 ward bosses, you can place them in the same place or in different places. When you're placing a ward boss and an immigrant cube, you would just take the cube and you'd place it wherever you'd like. And then you take a matching political favor token and add that to your area as well. I also want to point out that there's no limit to the number of immigrant cubes or ward bosses in each location. The next thing a player can do during their turn is they can use their office benefit. At the beginning of the game, nobody holds office, but later in the game after elections, players are going to be assigned different posts in the city, and it describes each of the individual abilities here, but they're also on the tile that you're going to have. And you can use those tiles at different times depending on the ability. Some are once a turn, some are twice per term. And unlike placing ward bosses or immigrant cubes on the board, that's totally optional, so that's not something you have to do. But from the second term of the game on, it's going to be available to you. And the third possible thing a player can do on their turn is slander another player. Remember, you can do these things in any order, but there's 3 possible things you can do, and that's place guys, use office benefits, or slander. You cannot slander in the first term of the game, so it's not available to you, but you are allowed to slander once per term for the rest of the game, and that's what these 3 chips represent. You can slander up to 3 times. Every time you slander, you're going to have to discard one of your black chips that you started the game with. You may only slander another player if you both have a ward boss in the same area. So let's pretend here in area 4, the yellow player wishes to slander the black player. Of course, he's going to have to discard this. He's never going to get it back. And he's going to have to discard a political favor token in his possession that matches at least 1 immigrant cube in that area. So if there was a whole bunch of immigrant cubes here, he could discard either a blue, a green, or a white. But for right now, there's just a white, so he'd have to discard as well a white political favor chip. And that would just go back to the supply. At that time, he just kicks the ward boss of the person he wishes to slander out of the area. And that's how a single slander works. You can complete your slander action just by doing that, or you could extend it into a double slander. So let's pretend in the same situation, the black player, it has to be the same player you're targeting. So even if purple was over here, you couldn't double slander into him, but we'll explain what that means in a second. So let's pretend there's also a white cube here. So yellow decides, as earlier, he's going to perform a slander action. He's going to discard that 1 black, which he has to. And he's going to have to discard a white chip because that's the only immigrant cube here. So he discards a white chip and he slanders the black player. Now he can actually go a step further and double slander the black player
by discarding 2 more white. It has to be the same color as the first token you discarded, and it has to match one of the immigrant cubes in the new area. That's why I added the white here, because otherwise this would be green and you couldn't do it. But you discard 2 more of these. You don't have to discard another black slandered chip. You can knock out another guy. So you've essentially double slandered the black player. It can be very expensive because it's going to cost you 3 identical colored political favor chips, and you have to be in adjacent regions where there are matching immigrant cubes between the areas. However, it can be a very devastating thing to do to somebody else, so you also might want to watch out for some repercussions there. After each player completes their individual player turns, which consist of the Castle Garden phase and taking their actual action, we're going to move on to the end of year phase. At the end of each year, you're just going to move the year marker up 1 space, but at the end of every 4th year, you're going to have an election that takes place, and you're going to wipe out all remaining cubes in the Castle Garden. Just throw them back in the bag. They might come out again later in the game. But the election phase is composed of 4 phases itself, which are the ward elections, awarding political favor chips, scoring victory points, and assigning city offices. In the ward election phase, you're essentially going to determine the winner of each ward or each region on the board, and you're always going to begin with Zone 1, starting in Space 1 and following the arrows. And then you're going to proceed to Zone 2, starting with Space 9 and following the arrows. And lastly, if it's in the game, Zone 3, beginning in Space 17, and again, following the arrows on the board. To determine the winner of each ward, you're going to count the number of ward bosses each person has in it. So let's pretend in Space 1 that the purple player has 3 and the yellow player has 2, while the black player has none. Let's also pretend that there's a blue and a green token in this space as well. All players with at least 1 ward boss present, in this case of course is purple and yellow, can also add to their total by blind bidding political favor chips that match at least 1 immigrant cube in the area. So in this particular case they could add green political favor, blue, or white. They cannot add orange, so they would just have these in their hands in their personal areas, and they can decide to add as many or as few as they'd like. So we can see here that purple has 4 blue. All of them would be eligible, but this is going to be totally blind. So they're going to hold out some of these. They might hold out 4, they might hold out 0, they might hold out some, and they're both going to do this at the same time and reveal. So in this example here, they've both added 2 to their total. So purple's 2 would put him from 3 up to 5, and yellows would go from 2 up to 4. Each word boss counts as 1, each of these counts as 1. No matter what happens with these, you win or lose, you're going to put them back in the supply like so. And now everybody's going to get wiped out of the area except 1 from the winner. So we know purple's total again was 5, and yellow's was only 4. So yellow's totally out of the area, but purple's going to keep 1 guy there. He is the victor. There's also some locations when you win them, you get a special benefit, like here, here, here. And when you win them, you're going to get that particular thing immediately. So for winning Area 1, you get to immediately place a cube from here. It doesn't have to be from the Castle Garden. You can take any cube you want in the whole game and place it on any region of the board. When you win these, you get a free political favor chip in the color of your choice at that time. I also want to point out that in the event of a tie, like for instance if both players had revealed a sum of 5 ward bosses plus political favor chips, nobody would win the area and everybody would be wiped out totally. So we're going to proceed and do that for all the wards in play. So after we do all that, we're going to move on to the award political favor chips part of the election phase. In this step, we're going to find out which player controls the most of each immigrant cube type. So let's pretend we went through all these, and maybe Zone 4 was a tie, and we had yellow win over here, and purple won up here. So let's throw all these in this area here. What you're going to do is you're going to count the number of each color cube that each person has won. So we can see here the yellow player has won 2 orange cubes, because that's all that is in his areas. The purple player has won 1, 2, 3 whites, 1, 2 greens, 1 blue, and 1 orange, and the black player over here has won 1 green. So we know that the purple player has won the most white, the yellow player has won the most orange, and so on. But each player that wins the color gets 3 political favor chips matching that color, so we know purple would get 3 white political favor chips because he controls the most white immigrant cubes. In the event of a tie, all tied players are going to take the 3 political favor chips. So for instance, if this wasn't here and both black and purple had 1 green under the control, they would both take the 3 green political favor chips at this time. After awarding all the political favor chips, we're going to move on to the scoring victory points phase. In this phase, everybody gets 1 point for each location they've won. So purple would get 1 for here and 1 for here. The only exception here is that Tammany Hall, which is always this space 14 here, gets 1 bonus point. So purple is going to get immediately 3 points, 1 plus 2, because this is Tammany Hall. Yellow would get 2, and black would get 1. And you would just move them immediately along this track up here. Whoever controls the most areas is going to become mayor, and mayor immediately gets a bonus 3 victory points, which is a lot of points in this game. And then they get to assign to all the other players in the game what role they're going to have in the government in the upcoming turns, which gives them the ability to perform an ability each turn. The mayor doesn't get an ability himself, but he gets 3 victory points, which is always nice to have. Before we get going with the example playthrough, I also want to talk about in a 3 or 4 player game, once you get up here into this 5th round, you're going to randomly stock these. So we would just take these, you can randomize them however you'd like, but we know they're going in zone 2, and we're just going to lay them out in whatever order like so. So now at this point in the game, in a 3-player game, zone 2 would be open for business, so you can make any of your plays in zone 2 just like zone 1. So the game continues like this, and the game ends after the 4th election phase at the end of the 16th turn, and at that time there's a final scoring, in which case players total up the number of political favor chips they have in each color. Whoever has the most gets a bonus 2 points for each color. If there's a tie, all the tied players will gain 2, and players get a 1-point bonus for each slander chip they didn't use during the game, and then at that point, whoever has the most points is going to be the winner. Let's go with this example playthrough. We know the first thing we're going to do is set up zone 1 no matter what the player count. Tammany Hall always gets a green cube, which we're going to put there, but the rest of these we're just going to randomize and just sort of lay out along zone 1. Now, if you're playing a 4 or 5 player game, you're also going to do this with zone 2 from the box as indicated, and if you're playing a 5 player game, you're going to do it with zone 3 as well. But we're just a 3 player game, so we're going to stop there at this point. We're going to get on with the turns. So the purple player is going to go first. We've just chosen randomly. So he begins with the Castle Garden phase. Now, the Castle Garden is empty at this time, so we're going to refill to 2 more than the number of players, which is going to be 5 of these. That's what he drew. Now he's going to take his individual turn. He doesn't have an office that he can benefit from yet, and he cannot slander during the first term of the game. So he knows he's just going to be placing word bosses on the board. He can either place 2 word bosses in the same or different regions, or 1 word boss and a cube. At this point, he wants to get his foothold in Tammany Hall, so he's just going to throw out a guy here and a guy down in region 1. Now the yellow player is going to take a turn just like that, and he's going to put 1 guy out here in area 2, but he's also going to put one of the white cubes from the Castle Garden into here. And when you do that, you take the matching political favor chip, so he's going to take one of those white tokens to his supply. And the black player is going to take a turn just like that. He decides he also wants to put 2 guys out on the board, and he's going to do so like that. Now that everybody's taken their turn, we're just going to advance this 1 space because it's not yet at an election. It's just going to continue like this with the purple player taking another turn. We don't refill the Castle Garden until it begins a player's turn totally empty, so it's going to remain where it is at this time. We'll jump ahead a little bit later so you can see what happens in an election round. Now that all players have taken their individual turns, it's the end of the year phase, and this is going to advance. And of course, we're going to have an election this time because it's the end of the first term. I also want to point out that if there's any cubes in the Castle Garden, they would immediately be removed at this time and put back in the bag. Of course, there are not, so that's not going to happen. But first thing we're going to do is we're going to do the ward elections part of the turn. So in zone 1, we can see the black player has 2 and the purple player has 2. So both of them are eligible to add white or orange political favor chips to the total. So they're both going to, in secret, decide what they're going to add. And we know that this guy has 2 potentially he could add, and the black player as well has 2 potentially because he could not add that green. So both players are going to do this simultaneously at the same time in secret and decide how many they're going to hold out. So both players decide to hold out their chips, and they reveal, and they both held out all 2. So both of them have reached a total of 4, which means nobody's going to win that area. And of course, all of these are lost. So they're pretty mad at each other right now. But then we're going to move on, follow the arrows to the next location. In this location is the yellow player and the purple player, but you can only add orange and white. So the yellow player knows that purple cannot add anything to it. So both of them are going to extend their hands and add nothing. So purple in one of the yellows is wiped out because you only get to keep 1 guy there. But this yellow guy controls this area. And also whoever wins area 2 can immediately place any cube of their choice out on the board. So he decides he's going to place an orange cube out into zone 6, which is what he did there. We're going to proceed like this for each of these locations. I do want to point out whoever wins zones 4 and 7, which of course is the black player, can take a political favor chip of their choice at that time. We've moved ahead a little bit. We've determined the winner of each location. Now we're going to see who gets political favor chips for each color. We can see that the black and purple player each control 2 greens, which is going to mean they both tie for first place, so they're both going to get 3 political favor chips in the green color. And now as far as white is concerned, we see the yellow player controls 2 white here, and the black player controls 1 white there. So the yellow player alone is going to get the 3 white chips. And then for orange, we see that the yellow player controls 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, while the black player controls 2. So the yellow player has also won the orange total. And finally for blue, we can see the yellow player controls 1 blue, and that's the only blue on the entire board. So that's going to be 3 more chips from him. He had quite a haul there, as you can see. Now we award victory points to all the winners. We can see yellow is going to get 2 points, so he immediately moves up 2. Black player is going to get 2 points. He immediately moves up 2. Purple only won 1 location, but he's also going to move up 2 because that one location was Tammany Hall. So next, the player who won the most wards becomes mayor. Unfortunately, we have a tie, but the tiebreaker is most political favorite chip, so we know the yellow player is going to become mayor. So he immediately gets 3 points for becoming mayor, and he's just going to move up 3 on the track here. And you can certainly mark on this track as well to see who's what. Now he gets to decide what the other players will be, so he's going to assign 2 of these roles. Since it's not a 5-player game, not all of the roles are going to be used in each round, but he's going to give these out to the other players. He decides to make the black player deputy mayor, so he's going to mark that he's deputy mayor up here, and he decides to make the purple player the precinct chairman. So they're each going to have these abilities that they can now use once per turn a little bit later in the game, once we move on to the second term here. And also remember, from the second term on, slandering is in the game. So at this point, we're going to advance to the next term. And we're going to put these out totally randomly in Zone 2 because Zone 2 is now open for business in a 3-player game. In a 4-player game, Zone 3 would now be open for business. We don't open Zone 3 until round 9 here. So anyway, these are totally randomized and just laid out. And now players can certainly place in Zone 2 as well as Zone 1. With that, we'll jump ahead a little bit later in the game so you can see some more interesting situations. Welcome back. We're reaching the end of the second term. We're in year 8, and purple is the last to go. I want to point out that whoever's the mayor in the second, third, and fourth term is going to go first in those rounds. So purple's actually last to go, and yellow's already been slandered by black before, but purple's about to up the ante a little bit. He's going to slander here by discarding 1 black. So yellow immediately loses this guy by purple paying 1 green because green is present here, so he pays that. And he's slandered, but he's also going to perform a double slander because there's yellow guys in the adjacent region. And the way he's going to do that is he has to pay 2 extra green because green's what he already paid, and there is a green here. So he's going to pay those, and he's going to move one of those yellow guys from the board. And now he can still perform his office benefit as well as place guys on the board. He's going to drop 2 ward bosses right there next to this yellow. He's really trying to push him out. Then he can move 1 cube from an adjacent area to his area. He's going to move this blue cube here to this one right here. And then with that, we were going to move on because he's done all 3 parts of his turn. Remember, you can do them in any order to the second election phase. At that point, we'll award a new mayor, we'll calculate some new point totals, and we'll get new assignments from the mayor. The mayor could assign people the same job or different ones, but from here in the video, we're going to move the year marker up 1, put these back in the bag. We're going to jump ahead to the end of the game so you can see the final situation. Welcome back. We're now at the end of the game. We just totaled the scores in the final election phase, and we found that both the yellow player and the purple player control 6 areas. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for yellow, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for purple. So we have to have a tiebreak to see who becomes the final mayor. Both of them actually have 10 political favored chips, so it's an exact tie. The second tiebreaker is whoever has the most green, and then white, and then so on. Clearly, the purple player has the most green, so he gets to become the final mayor. We don't really need to assign any other roles, but he does get the bonus 3 points, which could be a big difference in final scoring. So now, since the game is over, we're at the final scoring, and we figure out who has the most of each color type of chip. So we see he has the most green, so that's an additional 2 points. This player has the most white, however, so that's going to be 2 points for yellow. While the yellow and black player are tied for orange with 4 each, so they're both going to get the 2. And that really hurt the purple player because he has the most blue. So he's going to get those 2. And then each player gets 1 point for each unused slander chip. Purple slandered everybody pretty hard, but each of these guys is going to get 1 extra point for slander chips. So with that, the yellow player wins the game.
Tammany Hall is a good game. It's very easy to understand what's going on, and the game essentially builds on itself as it goes. Like in the first term of the game, no matter how many players you have or anything like that, you don't have abilities and you can't slander. But as the game goes, it becomes increasingly complex. More things are going on, especially with 3 players as more zones open up. But the game is deceptively cutthroat. If you can see these guys here on the box, they're very angry looking. That's kind of what the game feels like later on, especially as all the areas of the board are filled up, because every move you make and every move your opponent makes is essentially directly attacking them and directly attacking you, because everybody's sort of vying to become mayor, because that 3 points is massive. There's a fixed number of points in the game, and 3 is quite a big chunk of it. And aside from, having the most of things and not slandering people, the real way to score points in this game is to control areas. And part of that involves, that blind bidding during the elections, which can be crazy chaotic because you have no idea how many things they're going to bid or how many things you even want to bid because you don't know what other people are going to go for in other elections and things like that. So that keeps the game definitely interesting, but it can also make it very stressful too. And going back to the sort of directly attacking everybody aspect of the game, slandering, is nothing more than a direct attack on the that person. And getting double slandered is one of the most vexing things ever, but it can certainly be sweet if you do it yourself. I'm emphasizing this aspect of the game because some people really like that, and some people will not like it so much at all. But I emphasize the game is very easy to get into. It's very easy to understand the rules because you're basically just placing things on the board and trying to control as many areas as possible. So if it looked neat to you, check it out. That's Tammany Hall.